Hello everyone, today we're going to be going over the entire multiple choice section of the January 2023 Living Environments Regents exam, starting with question number 1. Number 1 asks us, the removal of the mitochondria from a typical animal cell would have the most immediate effect on the cell's production of what? Whenever you see mitochondria, what does the mitochondria do? Cellular respiration, aka it's the cell's main producer of ATP. In living animals, in plants, mitochondria makes the energy, makes the ATP. Choice number 3. Oxygen and glucose, that's produced by plants. It's asking for us for an animal cell, and DNA is produced mainly in the nucleus. Number 2 asks, which factor would be an abiotic limiting factor for a fish living in a lake in New York State? Abiotic limiting factor, keyword here, abiotic, that means non-living. So whatever is not alive is going to be our answer choice. Number 1 is wrong. Number 2 and 3, algae is a plant that's living. Humans fishing, humans are alive and they're doing something. And number of 3, fish predators. Fish are alive and they're predating. All 3 of these are all living things affecting the environment. Number 4, acidity, acid, that's not alive, that's abiotic, right? And it's affecting the water. Number 3 says, a native species is competing for resources with a non-native species that was accidentally introduced in the area. The non-native species is more likely to survive than the native species when what? This is talking about an invasive species. And all it's asking is, when does the invasive species prosper? When does the invasive species have a good situation? By good situation, I mean, when does it have just good situation? When can it kind of thrive, right? So number 1, automatically we can cross off. When both species eat the same food, that means that they're competing with another species to get food. Whenever there's competition, one species is going to get less food than the other. That opens up the chance that that invasive species will get less food, because it's getting less food, it's getting less energy, and it's not prospering, right? Number 2 says predators prey on both species. That's also wrong, because in here, the native and invasive species are both being killed by the same thing. They're both being killed off. Death, never a good thing. They're not prospering, right? Number 3 says native species is immune to a particular pathogen present in the ecosystem. This doesn't help the invasive species. This makes it worse for the invasive species because they don't have immunity to something. They're all going to die off, and the native species is going to live. That leads us with number 4 as our answer. The non-native species has no natural enemies. Think about it. If the invasive species has no predators, no enemies, nothing is going to kill it other than old age and other members of that species. Because there's nothing preying on that, they can grow like crazy. That's it. That's the only thing that that's the only situation that benefits invasive species. Moving on to number 4, which says that evidence suggests that a large meteorite hit Earth 65 million years ago, causing a layer of dust to block the sun, cooling the planet. It is estimated that 70% of all plant and animal species, including dinosaurs, died off as a result. The best explanation for the deaths of these organisms is that the amount of energy available to the biosphere was decreased. Think about it. Everyone needs energy. We as humans need energy. We take the energy in the form of food. Plants need energy. Back to the human thing. We need that in food. We either eat plants or we eat other animals which eat plants. Plants need energy from the sun in the form of light to survive, right? So if the amount of energy available to the biosphere was decreased, that means that there's less food for the plants, which means that there are less plants, which means that there are less things available to be eaten, which leads to starvation, right? Number 1 says consumers require sunlight to make sugars in order to survive. That's wrong. Consumers don't make sugars. Number 3 says all energy is produced only by plants. That has absolutely nothing. This doesn't explain why the animals died. And number 4, all animals eat plants for energy. That's false. Not all animals eat plants for energy. Some eat other animals, right? Number 3, the amount of energy available to the biosphere was decreased. Why? The sun cooling the planet and dust blocking the sun, right? We just said that plants need this take energy from the sun. If there's something blocking them from the sun, they're getting less energy. So the amount of energy given to plants is less. And where do animals get their energy? They get their energy from plants. So if they're eating plants that have less energy, they're also gonna have less energy equals less food equals major death, right? Moving on to number 5, it says DNA is formed using 4 kinds of base subunits in a double-strand segment of DNA. The percentage of the base C is 18%. What is the approximate percentage of the base T? A very important ratio to know. The ratio of A is equal to the ratio of T. It's 1 to 1, right? Same thing goes for C, and same thing goes for G, right? So if I have 2 adenines, I will always have 2 thymines, because adenine and thymine always pair up, right? I can't have, in a double-stranded form, in a double-stranded DNA, I can never have a base standing alone, right? If I have 4 cytosine, I have 4 guanine. Always the same thing, 1 to 1, right? So if the percentage of base C is 18, that means the percentage of base G also has to be 18, right? So if C is 18, G has to be 18. So that means that C plus G is equal to 36% of the entire strand of DNA, right? And that leaves us with 64%, which is equal to adenine plus thymine, right? Because 100 minus 36 is 64. If A plus T is equal to 64, all we need to do is divide by 2. We know that there's 32% adenine, 32% thymine. So leaves us with answer choice number 2. Remember that 1 to 1 ratio. Based on the information provided in the chart, how does the biodiversity in pond A confirm biodiversity present in pond B? If we look here, the biodiversity in pond A is much, much bigger. Just look at the amount of microorganism species. 4 times the amount of microorganism species are found in pond A. In total, this pond has 30 species, both plant and microorganisms. Pond B only has 16. So when it comes to diversity, diversity means the amount of species living in it. Biodiversity, amount of living species in it, right? So because this has 30 living species and this only has 16 living species, pond A is going to be more biodiverse, right? Which is choice number 1. Pond A has greater biodiversity than pond B because there are more species present. Number 7 says a person receives a transplanted organ. Many medications are necessary to keep the organ from being rejected. The process of organ rejection is similar to the one involved in what? Right. So when you are given a transplant, right? Let's just say this is a kidney. One of 2 things happens: either your body accepts it as its own organ, or your body rejects it. And what happens when it rejects it? You're given this new kidney, your body looks at it and says, hey, this is a foreign body. This was never here until this point. This is foreign. This will hurt us. This will damage us. This doesn't belong here. And what your body does is it sends out white blood cells. It sends out immune cells to go and destroy that kidney because it doesn't belong. It doesn't think that it belongs there, right? It's a foreign body. Because each one of your organs has some signature. The signature is different, so boom, right? And that medication that you need is called immunosuppressants. You suppress the immune system, that way it doesn't attack the brand new organ that you just got, right? And this is very similar to an allergic reaction where, for example, let's say this is your nose, right? And you have pollen, right? You have pollen coming into your nose. This pollen is a foreign body. For many people, their bodies detect pollen as a foreign body. They think it's harmful, much like the kidney is a foreign body, or the new kidney is a foreign body, and it sends out these immune cells, these white blood cells, to go and attack the pollen that's found in the blood, right? So it's the rejection of organs where you have all these cells attacking it is most similar to an allergic reaction. And a lot of you may confuse this with the production of an antigen. Don't confuse that. Antigens are for viruses. This is just a foreign body. Number 8 says Hydrilla, a plant native to Central Africa, was widely used in home aquaria. Hydrilla was often dumped with aquarium water into drains, sewers, or ponds. It then thrived and has become an invasive species, disrupting aquatic ecosystems from Florida throughout the northeast United States. Removing Hydrilla from these ecosystems will require either physical removing or adding chemicals to the affected waters to kill it. The result of the introduction of Hydrilla into native ecosystems in the United States has shown what? The answer to this is number 4. Right? It has shown that when humans alter ecosystems by adding Hydrilla, the specific organism Hydrilla, serious consequences can occur. The consequences is the disruption of ecosystems across the entire eastern seaboard, right? we can go over the other three choices. Number one, chemical controls will now be necessary to maintain a stable ecosystem. That's wrong, right? Every stable ecosystem, not every stable ecosystem needs chemicals. This one doesn't even need chemicals, right? Number two says Hydrilla will not continue to expand beyond the United States. That's wrong, right? Because it literally just said that it came from Florida, and now it's along all most aquatic environments next to Florida as well. So it's spread throughout the state and to other states. It's rapidly spreading, and because you need harsh chemicals to kill it or physical force, it seems like it is thriving, right? And three says organisms in ecosystems of the United States can eventually build immunity to Hydrilla. Obviously not. If it's spreading and if it's disrupting the ecosystem and if it's spreading all throughout the United States, obviously they are not immune to it. They are going to be affected by it. Number 9 says one result of the ability of organisms to detect and appropriately respond to stimuli is what? Answer to this is dynamic equilibrium, right? Gene manipulation is not your body's response. That's someone else manipulating someone else's genes. That's usually done in a lab. That's not natural. That is not your own body doing things. An allergic reaction, that's an immune response. Pollen and pathogens isn't a stimuli, right? And it's also not the best example of this. And an organ malfunction, that's not a response to stimuli, that's your organs malfunctioning, right? Whenever you see dynamic equilibrium, that's the same thing as saying homeostasis. So for example, if it's too hot outside, you will sweat, right? And that sweat is your body engaging in homeostasis to maintain dynamic equilibrium, aka your body temperature being normal, right? That is the best response, right? Dynamic equilibrium, think about it's literally homeostasis, and homeostasis, all that means is your body trying to maintain balance within itself based on your environment. Number 10 says the tube-lipped nectar bat is found in a national park in Ecuador and has one of the longest tongues in relation of size to any mammal. Its 8.5 centimeter tongue can reach into the deepest flowers. It is most likely the population of these bats with exceptionally long tongues will increase if in the ecosystem if what happens? Well, as for any trait, right? Think back to natural selection. If a certain trait is found favorable, more species will have that trait. Right? So for example, if this tongue actually helps them survive, if it gives them an advantage, if digging deeper into flowers means that you get more food more successfully, that is an advantage. That trait gives you an advantage. Thus, more of that trait will be passed on into future generations. Choice number 4 pretty much says that. The tongue variation provides the species with an advantage in surviving and reproducing, right? If more animals with longer tongues survive and they reproduce, their children, that long tongue will be passed on to their children. Why? Because the long tongue allowed them to survive long enough to reproduce, right? Number 3 is wrong. Long tongues increase competition. That means it's not favorable because you're competing. Number 2 is if the trait cannot get passed into future generations, that means it won't be passed on in general. And number 1 says the population of plants with very deep flowers suffers a sharp decrease. All that means is that they no longer need the sharp tongues to survive. Number 11 says some organisms have variation. 2 sources of these variations are what? Whenever you see variations, think about mutation, right? Right. So mutation is definitely a large source of any variation within any species, right? Mitotic and meiotic cell divisions, really not there, right? All this is doing is just making brand new cells, right? Meiotic cell division, that's what's going to give you sex cells. This has nothing to do with anything. Cloning and sexual reproduction isn't going to give you variation. If anything, cloning is going to make sure that everything is the same. Natural selection and evolution. Guess what natural selection is? Guess how they get these new traits? They get these new traits from mutations. For example, let's say this bird, right? Usually the species has a tiny beak like that. all of a sudden they have a long beak. One species of bird, the same species of bird, right? He gets a mutation that gives him a longer beak, right? This longer beak, it wasn't caused by evolution. It wasn't caused by natural selection. It was caused because there was a mutation in the gene that affects length of beak size, right? Now, because this guy has a longer beak, he can and it helps him survive. He can spread that long beak to other people until the entire species of birds have long beaks. That would be natural selection. That would be evolution. But this guy acquiring that variation on its own naturally came from mutation, and it came from a recombination of his genes. Moving on to number 12, it says that in order to prepare for future outbreak of Ebola or harmful virus, 2 vaccines were tested. In order for either of those vaccines to be effective, they must cause what? Cause the immune system to produce special proteins that will recognize and destroy the virus. I see no issue with that, right? So that's the answer. Because look at number 2, be able to destroy the DNA code that produces white blood cells. What? First of all, white blood cells don't carry the virus. And second, if you're destroying white blood cells, that's going to help the virus, not help you. Number 3, stimulate the human body to produce more antigens that could attach to and destroy the Ebola virus. No. What a vaccine does is it tells your body how to produce antigens, right? It never stimulates you in any single way. All it tells you is how you can. It just gives your body proteins. As number 1 says, it gives your body proteins. And with those proteins, it makes your body recognize the disease and destroy the virus. Number 4, produce bacterial cells that can attack Ebola virus. Bacteria cells aren't bacteria cells. Your body doesn't produce bacteria cells, you know? Moving on to number 13, the population of reindeer has become decreasing over the last 20 years in the Arctic because the climate change has led to more rainfall there. The rain freezes on top of the snow, preventing the deer from getting through to the snow to find food. Which action by humans has most likely contributed to climate change? Guys, recycling materials is helping it. Protecting wildlife is also helping it. Maintaining the ozone shield is also helping it. Burning fossil fuels is the only negative thing that happens here. We need ozone. Protecting wildlife is positive. Recycling is also positive. Burning is the only negative choice. Number 14 says, which statement about the functioning of the human reproductive cycle or system is true? Number 1 says that the zygote helps the mother provide milk to the fetus before it's born. Nope. The zygote is in a mother would most likely just be the egg cell. It has nothing to do with that. Testes produce unfertilized eggs and release them. Nope. Testes produce sperm. Ovaries are where male gametes undergo meiosis. Nope. Ovaries are for females. That leaves us with number 4 as the only right answer. The uterus is where the fetus develops and internally until birth. This is the only right choice. 15 says, Christmas tree farmer cuts down a native forest to plant Fraser fir trees. Compared to the original forest, the newly planted Christmas trees will most likely be what? Well, if he cuts down a native forest to plant Fraser fir trees, he's cutting down a very diverse environment. It's a forest, right? You're not only just gonna have trees, you're gonna have bushes, you can have little tiny animals living there. You can have bugs, you know, a forest is a very diverse area. If you cut all this down into a lot and only grow trees, and also only grow the same type of trees, it's going to be way less diverse. And because it's less diverse, it's going to be a lot less stable. So it's less stable. Oh, sorry, that's the opposite of what I want. It should be less stable and also less diverse. Because let's say that a virus comes that negatively impacts these trees. Since the entire environment is just these trees, that one virus is going to kill off everything in this environment, right? There's no balance. It's all the same thing and it's less diverse. So moving on to number 16, a major environmental concern in urban areas is pollution produced by automobiles. Fluids such as oil and gasoline may leak out of vehicles and end up in lakes, streams, and rivers. One reason why scientists are concerned about this type of pollution is what? So let's see we're looking for a choice that gives us a negative outcome, right? So number 1 says the presence of these fluids in waterways could make them uninhabitable for aquatic organisms and reduce water supplies for humans. Yeah, that's why they're concerned, right? It's an environmental concern, right? because it negatively impacts the environment. That's why they're concerned, right? 2 says the addition of these fluids will cause increased levels in lakes and rivers, possibly causing flooding. How if you add a bunch of gasoline to a river, how will that possibly cause flooding? You need a lot and a lot and a lot of gasoline to even begin to raise the water level. So just leaks, tiny leaks of it, and oil will never do that. 3 says these fluids increase the rate of photosynthesis. They don't. You know, gasoline and oil spills probably decrease the rate of photosynthesis because they block the amount of sunlight that reaches into the water, because gasoline and oil are dark, and they stick to the top of the water. And 4 says the addition of these chemicals to waterways would reduce air quality, which would lead to increased respiratory diseases, and global warming. If you add this to waterways, if it's in water, how can it get into the air? You know, if this was smoke released by burning of oil, or smoke released by the burning of gasoline, yes. But because this is being released into the water, because the oil and because the gasoline is inside of the water, it's not getting to the air, so it can't possibly cause respiratory diseases, and it can't cause global warming, because you need it to be in a gaseous form in the air and not be a liquid in order for that to happen. Moving on to number 17, when a plant is in a hot and dry environment, the guard cells may close the stomate openings in the leaves. This action will directly cause what? This action will directly maintain homeostasis by reducing the evaporation of water. Yes. Number 1 is our choice. This is, once again, a response to stimuli. Because it's hot and dry, we're going to close the openings that allow water to leave, right? Will it harm the plant by cutting off its oxygen supply? Absolutely not. Oxygen supply, hello, it needs CO2, not oxygen, right? So that's wrong. Is it going to maintain homeostasis by preventing carbon dioxide from entering? No, that's not what it's for, right? Because if it's in a hot and dry environment, CO2 entering isn't going to harm it at all. What's going to harm it, what you're trying to keep in as a plant in a hot and dry environment, is the precious water inside, right? Number 4 says it'll harm the plant by cutting off its energy supply. That's also false. Guys, if a plant or an animal does something, it's usually for the better benefit of itself, right? I don't think any animal will ever evolve something that will directly hurt itself. That's not how evolution works. Evolution only works where favorable traits that help survival get passed on and get adapted. Number 18 says the destruction of ocean habitats by pollution today means that the organisms living there may not survive in the future. By polluting the oceans, humans are automatically, we can eliminate choice number 1. They're not helping advance economic gains by using resources wisely, right? If you're polluting something, if you're damaging the environment, you're not using resources wisely. A wise use of resources means that it's sustainable. That means that you're not damaging the environment, right? Think about it. If you're destroying ocean habitats by pollution, right, that means that you can extract less resources from that in the future because it's now destroyed, right? So that's not using resources wisely. Number 2, altering the equilibrium of ocean ecosystems. That is probably the best choice to go here, right? If you destroy ocean habitats, guess what? If you destroy a habitat, what's that going to affect? Equilibrium. Equilibrium is what keeps the habitat in balance. If you destroy the habitat altogether, you're pretty much destroying all equilibrium, so you're altering equilibrium, right? Decreasing the rate of species extinction is just dead wrong. If you destroy an ocean habitat, things are going to get extinct because the place that they live is no longer there. And if you increase, this does not increase the stability of ocean, because as you destroy an ecosystem, you're decreasing the stability, right? It's actively decaying. It's bad, right? Number 19 says each of the cells present in a woman contains a complete set of chromosomes. The only exceptions are her egg cells, right? Unfertilized egg cells only have 23 chromosomes, right? And they get another 23 when they bind to a sperm cell. Lung cells, nerve cells, skin cells, anything that's not a sex cell will always have 46 chromosomes. Unless they have Down syndrome or some other issue, but it's obviously, it didn't tell us that in this problem, so we're just going to assume that. Number 20 says the diagram below represents two processes that occur in some living organism. X most likely represents what? Well, look here. We have CO2 and we have water, and it's producing sugars. Immediately, we should be thinking about what? Well, we should be thinking about photosynthesis, right? Because we're producing energy in sugars. Production of sugars, plants, photosynthesis. Always remember that, right? Furthermore, we're taking in water and we're taking in CO2. Those are two things that take intake. Two of the three things that are needed to undergo photosynthesis. The most important thing is sunlight. You're missing sunlight. Process A is photosynthesis. You need sunlight for that to happen. 21 says, which row in the chart below contains the correct sequence of events involved in the formation of a human embryo? Let's see. Oh, the choices are here. Wow, that's strange. All right, which sequence events for embryo? Okay, so automatically 2 and 3 we can take that out, because in order to have an embryo, in order to have a human embryo, you first need 2 sex cells. You need an egg, you need a sperm, right? And you need to produce an egg and you need to produce a sperm. So the first thing that needs to happen is the production of those 2 cells, right? And that's called meiosis, right? So we're going to choose the 2 choices that have meiosis first, right? Next, what happens is that egg and that sperm have to combine, right? The sperm has to fertilize the egg, has to go inside of it. These 23 chromosomes, all these alleles that they have, all the traits that these specific traits that each one of these cells have to combine together in a process called differentiation, which comes of, actually no, sorry. These guys need to combine together in a process called fertilization. I just said the egg has to, the sperm has to fertilize the egg. Because this one says differentiation after meiosis, this has to be wrong. Correct answer is number 4, right? Egg cells are produced, sex cells are produced, they fertilize each other. Oh, so sorry guys. Yeah. Fertilization, mitosis happens. They get fertilized, then this cell begins to divide. It begins to divide. It goes from only being 2 cells to being thousands and thousands of cells. And now that you have thousands of cells, they're going to differentiate and they're going to form organs. Number 22 says Helicobacter pylori, H. pylori, is the bacterium responsible for most ulcers and many cases of stomach inflammation. An antibiotic has been found to kill these bacteria. It works because H. pylori makes a particular enzyme that happens to react with the antibiotic to make it poisonous to the bacterium. The sequence in the diagram shows the effects of the antibiotic treatment on the 2 strains of H. pylori, which does not produce an enzyme. The overall series of events best illustrates the process of what? Well, what happens, right? H. pylori, this guy who's angry over here, is affected, right? Has an enzyme, and because of the antibiotic, it dies, right? Here, this one says that they have no enzyme, right? And because they have no enzyme, the antibiotic has no effect on it, right? And this mutant with no enzyme, because it doesn't die, it continues to reproduce, right? This sounds a lot like natural selection, right? Because the guy, or the H. pylori, with the mutation that is beneficial, with a trait that's beneficial, no enzyme, is given an advantage, aka it's not killed off by the antibiotic, and because it's not killed off, it's allowed to reproduce and pass on its trait of no enzymes to the future generation, or these 3 guys right here.